speakers, let me first explain the structure of this webinar. This webinar will take 2 rounds of presentations made by the speakers. So in the first round, each speaker will be given roughly 10 minutes to make their presentations. And then we will have a Q&A session related to what they presented. And then we will have another round of presentations made by the same set of speakers, again for about 10 minutes each, which will be followed by a general discussion. So we have Professor Marabe going first. He will talk about the reasons why that led to the present situation in the agriculture sector in the country. And I would like to invite Professor Buddhi Marabe to make your presentation. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dilini. Good afternoon, everyone who are joining this forum today. Good afternoon from Sri Lanka. And thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me to join this forum. I consider it as a privilege and with a lot of pleasure I'm joining and start trying to discuss issues related to this matter. And thanks, Dilini, for giving me a set target to address at this particular limited time period given to me. Interestingly, today is a very important day when you look at the global community and Sri Lankans, because it's 22nd May is the International Day for Biological Diversity. So we have been talking on a different subject, actually. If at all, we are to have a good forum. The second important point is Sri Lanka today is to celebrate or is celebrating 50 years from being a People's Republic, changing our name Ceylon to Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka on 22nd May in 1972. But instead of talking about those things, Dilini, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, we have been talking about a food crisis in Sri Lanka today. What a level of chaos our policymakers and their advisors have created in this country. It's really pathetic. So with that short note, let me share the screen to give away make my first presentation as a title being given to me, as you quite correctly said, Dilini. I'll be focusing on this subject. I hope my slides are in correctly. You can see them.
Yes,
in
sir.
Slide share mode. Thank you very much. So my first presentation will be focusing on factors that led to present plight of the agri-food sector in Sri Lanka. I will take mainly paddy as an example, rice as an example, but of course bring in examples from maize and tea as and when necessary. To start on with, I'm going to tell you a short story using just one slide. That is to let you know how we have performed in the past, the progression that Sri Lanka has shown with respect to rice production. But one important thing, please don't think it is the same for all other food crop sectors. So there are certain issues, of course, we have to discuss, but let me focus on this just to bring in the idea, my argument to show that how detrimental these decisions that have been taken in the past. If you look at the rice, I'm ignoring 2021 data for the time being, but I can explain it later. 2020, this is how it looked like. The blue color line is the rice production and the red color line is the rice requirement. If you look at it very, very carefully, you will see since 2008 onwards, we have been producing more rice than we can consume, but these production aspects have been affected very badly whenever the time there was a climate change issue. So if you look at the milestones and what has taken place in Sri Lanka over the years, you can see pinpointing several years, there are certain issues that have taken place that have contributed to increasing rice production. And of course, the climate change issues that have contributed very badly or affected very badly in terms of production aspect, which gives a very, very clear picture as you see it from here. The first ever record that's available for fertilizer use, mineral fertilizer use for paddy cultivation was in 1952. We have the H4 variety coming up to boost the yield from a mere 650 kilograms per hectare, which is the average yield that we gain from cultivating traditional rice varieties using our traditional technologies. And of course, there were new improved varieties later. The fertilizer subsidy officially was given as recorded in 1962, and it continued like that. And there are a few more information for you to understand how we have fared in the past. In 1952, Sri Lanka had to enter into the Sri Lanka-China Rubber Rice Pact. That was in 1952 because we were in a dire need of rice to feed our nation. By that time, our population was nearly about 6 million, and we were still importing 60% of our requirement to feed our nation. Now it's more than 22 million, about 22 million, and we have been producing more rice than we can consume, as you see in this slide. Then, of course, the famous Hartal came in 19. And in 2005, the Ketata Aruna fertilizer subsidy came into effect, where fertilizer for paddy farming was given at a price about 90% subsidized, depending on the world market price. And of course, there was a world food crisis in 2008. You can see Sri Lanka was performing well in terms of rice production, as well as in the other agricultural sectors. Of course, I'm not going to present data. And on 2020, there was a free fertilizer that was given to paddy farmers. And many of these subsidy issues, I'm not very sure what happened exactly in 1962, but in the recent past, they were basically political promises, pledges that were later made into policies of the government of Sri Lanka. Well, this is a story that we can build upon. There has been a progression which we have been proud of, thanks to our breeders, thanks to agronomists, soil scientists, economists, everyone, and more importantly, the university, academia, and the farming community who embrace certain technologies that were recommended by the Department of Agriculture and make sure the food crop production, especially rice, took place in the way that we wanted it to happen. Now, this is the progression that has been reversed by the decision that was taken last year, very unfortunately, about a year ago. If you look at the President's website, Presidential Secretariat website on 22nd April, it categorically presents a statement made by His Excellency, the President of Sri Lanka on 22nd April, when he addressed the institutional heads. This was the first time that he was very explicitly saying that no matter whatever it's going to come across, he's definitely going to ban the importation of chemical fertilizers and pesticides. But of course, the Presidential Secretariat, the website highlighted the chemical fertilizers only. When you look at it, it just came as a statement that was made by the President at a meeting held with the institutional heads, but it categorically highlighted certain issues why this ban will be in effect in the near future, because this was stated on 22nd April 2021. There was nowhere that it was highlighted that foreign currency was an issue at that time. But of course, people are talking about misuse, overuse of pesticides, human health effects, environmental effects, and those are the things that came into discussion at that time. And just 5 days later, on 27th April 2021, based on a cabinet paper submitted by the President himself, the Cabinet of Ministers decided to impose a complete ban on import of synthetic fertilizer and pesticide. This is the starting point of a pathetic scenario that Sri Lanka has to undergo over a period of more than 12 to 14 months right now. So that's where it stands. And of course, this Gazette notification that was issued and the decision taken at the Cabinet of Ministers was revoked later on 30th November by making sure that they have been repealed with another Gazette notification, extraordinary Gazette notification number 2256 of 23 on 30th November. But though the changes were made, it was too late. We have missed not only one bus of progression, of development, but we have missed several buses, unfortunately, and it has created an irreversible impact. That's exactly what I'm going to present. And let us see about the end result of it. And then I'm going to tell you what I think and as I feel, very importantly, about what factors and what drivers and what made us to fall into this trouble and trap. End results in 2021-2022 Maha season. We all know the official results in terms of statistics will be released by the Department of Census and Statistics. But today, they have not released the results of the Maha season. Quite natural. Those results will be released somewhere during end of June. But all the internal documentations available at the Department of Agriculture, circulated in official terms, still internally, not made public, very clearly, categorically say that paddy yield in the Maha season in 21-22 have been reduced by 50%, if not less. I'm repeating, by 50%, if not less. Now, this is an information that is pretty important for us to look at our food security, food availability, stability of food production, and of course, purchasing food at an affordable prices. I'm not bringing in other aspects of definitions that are involved in defining food security, but just take it for granted for the time being. Then let's move into maize and see what has gone in. In the maize, in the case of maize, Maha season is the main maize producing season, as in the case of rice in Sri Lanka, and the maize production has been reduced by about 65 to 70% based on the information available. These are accurate information, but of course they have to be specified, spelled out by the Department of Census and Statistics for them to become national data. For the time being, let's take it for granted. And remember, paddy is our major staple affecting our human food availability. Maize is 85% of the maize that is produced in Sri Lanka goes for animal feed. So animal feed is in trouble. In other words, the whole animal production sector is in trouble because of this scenario. And more importantly, if you look at year-on-year food inflation, according to the Department of Census and Statistics, in March, the food inflation was 30.2. In April this year, it was 46.6%. Just imagine the level of problem that we are in. It's terrible. But then look at the tea. It's our major export earner in terms of agriculture. We all know food security can be achieved mainly in two ways. One way is to maximize the contribution of agriculture. That's what we have been doing in the past quite well, I must tell you. It has been reversed. The progression has been reversed by the decision taken, unfortunately. That exactly what you see from the paddy yield data saying that it has been reduced by 50%. And animal feed is another major issue. But let's look at the tea production in this country. The made tea production alone in November, December, just 2 months in last year, was reduced by more than 12 million kilograms compared to the same period in 2020. Mind you, 2021 in terms of climate was a wonderful year. We had less pest and disease issues and less externalities apart from in 2020, we had COVID, of course. There may have been spill-off effects in 2021, but the major impact was due to this drastic decision that was taken. And moving further, during the first quarter of this year, from January to March of 2022, the export earnings from tea has been reduced by about $52 million compared to what has happened in 2021. What's going on? We are losing precious foreign exchange. We are losing our food production and we are losing our foreign exchange. In all cases, we are in deep trouble with respect to food security in this country. That exactly things that worries us. But of course, there are way outs. We have to plan very carefully, which I'll be presenting in my second session. So let's live with the negative aspects for the time being. Now, let's look at the food imports. You saw the graph figure that I showed you a little while ago about the production of rice in Sri Lanka, paddy converted to rice, and of course the way that we have progressed in terms of producing more rice that we can consume. But see what has happened in 2022. We know our monthly rice requirement is about 185,000 to 195,000 metric tons, and the annual requirement, naturally multiplying it by 12, will land somewhere between 2.3 to 2.4 million metric tons. Interestingly, though real data information were not divulged to the general public in terms of what is happening on ground with respect to agriculture, on 10 January, the cabinet, at the very beginning of this year, at the second cabinet meeting, the cabinet of ministers approved a request put forward by cabinet paper put forward by the Minister of Trade to import 300,000 metric tons of rice from Myanmar. And in January, the Minister of Trade has also requested China to provide us with 1 million metric tons of rice as a donation. China did not agree to that. Instead, they have provided us with only 5,000 metric tons of rice when you look at even the recent data. And in March 22 came the Indian credit line to provide us with about 40,000 metric tons of rice. That's how it has happened. If you just add up all these requests that we have made, it contributes to about 60% of the requirement of rice of a 22 million population in Sri Lanka. Remember what I told you at the beginning? In 1940s, 50s, our population was 60%. So our population was 6 million. We had to import 60% of our rice requirement, mainly from Myanmar even at that time, to feed our nation. History is repeating very badly, pathetic. And what has happened with all this progression that have been shown in agriculture sector, not only our production, even our pride is beaten into death. That's an important point to be kept in mind. And if you look at the real rice imports, that will also show you the pathetic situation that we face right now, we are in right now. In 2020, only about 14,000 metric tons of rice have been imported. In 2021, remember, the government of Sri Lanka towards the latter part of 2021 liberalized importation of rice. In other words, anyone was given a chance to import rice to Sri Lanka. We know paddy is not allowed to be imported, but of course rice can be imported, and we have imported about 147,000 metric tons of rice in 2021. But when you come to 2022, until 15th April, just over a quarter of the year, we have imported more than 300,000 metric tons of rice. More to come. Remember, today it is expected about 9,000 metric tons of rice as an humanitarian aid to be probably will land in Sri Lanka coming from India. So things are happening in the way that we have never expected them to happen. Why? Because of the decision that was taken. And to come up with a global scenario and to show you where Sri Lanka stands with respect to food security index or with respect to food security in the country is another pathetic story, which gives a clear impression where we are, thanks to irrational decisions taken by the policymakers, very unfortunately. The Global Food Security Index in 2012, starting from 2012, every year, they start ranking countries in the world in terms of food security status. So depending on different indices, they come up with a final conclusion saying that, okay, the countries are at a level, whether they are food secured or not. In 2012, Sri Lanka was ranked top in terms of food security, Global Food Security Index. Same thing happened later. In 2015, 2019, Sri Lanka was still right on top when you start comparing countries in South Asia. 2020, COVID hit hard at us. But of course, Sri Lankan government took some major decisions to support agriculture. But there were between country differences in the responses that we have had. And Sri Lanka became number 2. In 2021, here comes one of the worst decisions made in the history of Sri Lanka, at least since gaining independence in 1948. And Sri Lanka was positioned in the 3rd position in terms of food security. This itself gives an indication where we are right now. A lot of scientists predicted this to happen. The predictions have come true, but then it's nothing to be happy. Scientists are usually happy when their predictions come true, especially when the predictions are made on scientific grounds. But here's something that we have to weep inside and try to find solutions to overcome this problem, not only on behalf of us, but behalf of many, many people in this country. So naturally, from the time this decision came into effect, many scientists, academia, farmers, except for those who advised the government to go ahead with this decision, went against it. Why? That's the most important point that we have to look into. So actually, I'm giving my conclusion at this slide, but I'm going to justify why I've given this conclusion. The 2 important things that I feel that has contributed to this, to make this decision and put the country in such a dire state, is because myth dominating science. Because of that, there were a lot of misconceptions, misjudgments, and misinterpretations given. And because of that, also because of the myths, whims, and fancies of people, without looking at the scientific data, without going on evidence-based decision-making, they naturally went into an irrational and non-scientific decision-making process, as I told you, which has resulted in one of the worst man-made disaster in agriculture in Sri Lanka since 1948. So let me very quickly go through why I say this, why I bring these 2 things together, and telling that these are the 2 major factors that have contributed for this decision-making and position Sri Lanka in such a dire state, as I told you a little while ago. First important thing, remember the Presidential Secretariat's explanation given about environmental issues, about health issues, overuse of pesticides, overuse of fertilizers, and so on. And one of the myths that have been there right throughout is there was a claim saying that Sri Lanka uses the highest quantity of synthetic fertilizer, kilograms per hectare of cropland. When at the time the decision was made, at the time in 2021, the data available were in the global scale up to 2018, comparing all countries. But if you look at it carefully, look at the level at which Sri Lanka has been using fertilizer, synthetic fertilizer. So the message or the information that have been fed into policymakers are totally wrong, given a totally totally different picture. I'm sure have created a chaos in people's mind who did not know what's actually happening on ground. That is an important factor. That is also an unfortunate incident that has created people to make these type of decisions and go ahead. And again, the next one is about pesticide. The alleged claim that people have made Sri Lanka use high amounts of pesticides. Look at what has happened when you compare with South Asian countries and Southeast Asian countries. It is not correct to compare Sri Lanka or put Sri Lanka in the same basket in developed world, but developed world use more pesticides, more fertilizers than Sri Lanka does. I don't want to go into those details, but just what I want to let you know is that all the information that they used or they have not used have given a rise to an irrational and unscientific decision, which non-scientific based decision that have led into the disaster in this country. Then about the claims of overuse of fertilizer and pesticides in Sri Lanka. Please do keep in mind the pesticide imports and fertilizer imports are well regulated in this country. People cannot play around with it. Fertilizer issues, imports are governed by the National Fertilizer Secretariat. Pesticides are governed by the Register of Pesticides. In other words, depending on the crop, depending on the cultivating season, and depending on the extent that we cultivate, the quantity of fertilizer that to be imported based on different types and based on the nutrient requirement of the crop given by the different commodity research institute, including Department of Agriculture, is the one that will determine the total amount of fertilizer to be imported to this country in a given year. So what is this story all about? Using fertilizer or overusing fertilizer. Pesticides, of course, Register of Pesticides also look at in a different scenario, but in a similar way, where licensure will be given to import pesticides depending on the requirement of a given year. What usually would have happened for people to come up with this kind of a conclusion is that when the fertilizer is given free of charge since 2020, and even before at a 90% level of subsidy, naturally people may obtain fertilizer to be used for paddy, which is intended to, where the fertilizer is intended to be used, but then people may have moved forward and deviate from their natural practice and may have used the same fertilizer for other type of crops like vegetables, root crops, and so on. So in the case of vegetables, there's an overuse, but if the fertilizer that has been brought in to be used for paddy cultivation is being used in vegetable production, then of course in paddy cultivation there's an underuse. Overall, the overall fertilizer quantity being imported to Sri Lanka is a constant and is decided at the very beginning of the year. Customs of Sri Lanka will never allow anything to be brought in legally, but of course, anything being smuggled to the country, we cannot help. Then the fourth point, of course, about the contribution of agrochemical on non-communicable diseases. There were a lot of issues with respect to CKDU. I'm not a medical professional, so let me use a statement made by the chairperson of the National Research Council, who is a medical professional, Professor Hemantha Durampala. On 14 June 2021, he came on national TV and kicked out all those speculations that people made relating CKDU to agrochemicals, including fertilizer and pesticide. What he said was, especially in Anuradhapura and Polonnaruwa, where this CKDU is spreading rapidly even in the recent past, the major contributor is about low intake of drinking water and about fluoride content in water. He also said categorically that he has submitted these results to the Ministry of Health. We are still waiting for a final verdict. And about organic farming, organic fertilizers in crop field. Remember, I'm talking about why people went against this decision. It's not going against the government, but going against an irrational decision because there are scientific facts saying that from the time the decision has been taken, it's written all over about the negative effects that is going to cause. So this is what we knew from the very beginning. With all this data, people were wondering, people who are knowledgeable wondering why Sri Lanka is trying to take the decision, make the whole country into one experimental plot and try to go ahead with organic farming, just forgetting, ignoring all the progression that we have made over a 70-year period since gaining independence. This is about the world scenario and about Sri Lankan scenario of organic farming. And we knew the story of Bhutan and we knew the story of Cuban agriculture even at that time. In 2018, with an effort of moving into the first organic country or country with full of organic agriculture, Bhutan paid the price in 2018, where they had to import about 50% of his food requirement. And the target that they had to become organic, 2020, the goalpost was shifted to 2030. They are now even thinking about shifting it further. Cuban agriculture, we talk highly about Cuban agriculture, but in 2020, the WFP report very clearly said that Cuba is importing 70 to 80% of its food needs, and they require food aid. So this is the situation. While knowing all these things, we ignored the situation, and we simply forgot about the progress that we have made over the years, thanks to the Green Revolution. And if technologies have been misused, we should have corrected them rather than kicking out technology. That's an unfortunate decision that was made. All this information that I'm going to present to you now also were available in the scientific forum. In USA, there was an interesting study done with a large land extent. The USDA organic survey was completed in 2014, and it categorically said the organic yield was lower in 84% of the crops that they cultivate, and only in 9% of the crop, which are mainly hay or silage crops, not even directly consumed by human beings, are the ones that have given more yield than the conventional type of farming where we use more synthetic fertilizer. So this is the pathetic situation, pathetic in the sense, the situation where people simply ignore this scientifically valid information. And more importantly, coming from Sri Lanka, why did scientists came forward and told the government several times, not once, several times, to remove this or go back on this decision as early as possible, though it took 7 months for the government to think of it and revert the Gazette notification that were used. There's a very interesting piece of information available with the Rice Research and Development Institute, where they continue research for 11 long years. We have 2 cultivating seasons in Sri Lanka, 22 consecutive seasons. Try to compare use of organic matter, use of fertilizer, and combination or integrated use of synthetic fertilizer and organic matter, and try to assess the yield. More importantly, what the results say are very clearly that adding organic matter alone right throughout during this 22 season study, the yield of the organically grown plots were at least 21.5% to 31.5% lower than the chemically treated plot. And of course, one of the important points that we learned out of this study was that when you use synthetic fertilizer and of course organic fertilizer, organic matter conjunctively, that always gives the higher yields right throughout this process during both Yala and Ma season. So while having this information, people simply ignore it. That's what I said from the very beginning. It's the myths that have dominated science, and irrational and unscientific decisions have been made because the evidences were available. Unfortunately, they did not use it. And even the Sri Lanka Agricultural Economics Association, after the government made this decision, came up with a very good estimate saying that if this decision continues, this would be the end results. Look at paddy. At the very beginning, what they said was, considering only fertilizer, if fertilizer is not supplied in the way that it has been done in the past, the agricultural economists predicted that the yield will be reduced by 30 to 35%. But mind you, fertilizer is not the only thing that is required. There are other agricultural inputs and other agricultural practices in combination that will provide the final productivity and final yield. Of course, the pesticide part has not been considered here. So when you look at the pesticide part, including in the research that was done at Batalaguda Rice Research and Development Institute, where they also looked at the fertilizer component only, but they made sure pest and diseases are managed properly. The end result right now has gone beyond that. As I told you at the beginning, the rice production in the Maha season, the main cultivating season in Sri Lanka, has been reduced at least by 50% based on the available information. It's a pathetic situation, as you see. And what the Sri Lanka Agricultural Economics said at the very beginning has become a reality, and even at a much severe level. That's the important thing that has to be kept in mind. So, Dilini, thank you very much. I'm going back onto the previous slide that I told. The main factors that have contributed to this very drastic decision that has been taken by a human being and a group of human beings is because they completely ignored science. They completely completely ignore the evidences that have been made available based on scientific information. And the myths dominated science, as I told you. So I'm repeating what I said at the very beginning. There's always a chance and high probability, and Sri Lanka has become a classic example for moving away from evidence-based decision making, especially in agriculture, creating such a disaster in this country. Let's look at how we are going to overcome it, or at least to mitigate this impact during my second session. Thank you very much for the opportunity granted.
Thank you very much, sir. Even though it went over time, I think you presented some of like alarming facts, and like I was also like watching them with so much enthusiasm that I didn't want to stop you or interrupt you. And I think you gave a classic example of how we should go about looking at data in your presentation itself. So with that, let me now invite our second speaker, Professor Udit Jayasinghe. He will be talking about what are the symptoms of a collapsing agri-food sector in a country, and taking examples from Sri Lanka. And over to you, sir.
Can you share my slides, or do I?
So I also can share.
Yeah, I can, right?
Okay.
Who can share?
Yeah, you can. You're given the rights.
Right. Okay. We'll see. Yeah. Okay.
So if you can go for the slideshow.
Right. Okay.
Great.
Can you see?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for giving this opportunity to talk to you through the Sri Lanka Agricultural Economics Association and our Economic Association. I'm a member of both, so happy to contribute. You know the term here in the title, very, very important term is the restoration. Restoration is needed when something is collapsed. Collapse may be because of internal reason, external reasons. This restoration is needed because of, economically and physically a bad decision we have taken in terms of agriculture sector. So now my role is to go continue with where Professor Marambe stopped. So what are the different roles the agriculture institutions can take forward to restore what has been already collapsed? We are not going to say we were in a very good position even before. Our engine may not be the best Boeing or a Toyota, but it has been running at that time. As data has shown, you can see things are improving, at least maintaining. That system was collapsed, so that means engine was stopped. So with that, I start. When we talk about the agri-food supply chain today, therefore anybody, even a O-level student who is sitting for exam today, if he's asked to draw or tell about the agri-food value chain, he or she will have to draw in this way because it is now upside down, right? From inputs to consumer, things should be moving. Now we are rather talking about, rather than putting inputs and getting into production, processing, going through markets and come to the consumer, things are coming from other ports, maybe from India or somewhere else, as products to consumer maybe he doesn't know what to do, and marketing all system was collapsed. So we have to restore this system back, starting from the simple economic terms. Input through technology will have to come up with outputs, then become outcomes later on. So our need of the hour is to make this one happening in the systematic way, in the scientific way, in a practical way. It should happen. So what I'm going to tell, therefore, to make my presentation limited into 10 minutes, what we should do, I will tell this way. We have policy options, macro level, meso level, micro level. Immediately, maybe tomorrow, within a week or within a month of June, things are to be done. Then we'll have to think about very short term, I would say by end of this year. 3 to 5 years, maybe our medium term, then 10 years, maybe the long term. So this is the way we will have to think of what we should and how we should deal with the agriculture supply chain. In that sense, as an economist and as a person who directly involved with Professor Marbe and other 11 people and with all other scientists in Sri Lanka and administrators, every possible institution we have talked with, we have come up with even policy, because what I have realized is, even in my short term as a secretary for 195 days, we should work, because I went into a system where I already collapsed with that Gazette notification in April. I went on June 10th. With all great difficulties, blames and others, we want to restore somehow by internally fighting with this one to establish agriculture and food security of the country first, because we know in the medium term to long term, this will be affected very badly. So in doing so, our effort was to not to make political decisions to correct that one, this one, that one, this one, bring in fertilizer, others, these are to be happen or not happen. We very vehemently work on setting the agriculture policy scenario for that one, and the forum and agriculture service. These were the three things I should tell. You might think in the very short term what we can do. No, they are already done. I would say, if you go to the computers of mine and Professor Marbe and others, these are already in our computer. We have set it, we have written, we have even handed over up to the president. Okay, this is the thing. So agriculture policy, national agriculture policy has been set very practically, and we ask, please implement this one. Then we can work from that one, rather than talking about where we have made mistakes. If we set a good policy with all aspects in it, institutions, people, policy action, and everything, everybody can come up and rally around one mat and start working. So that's the first thing we wanted to do, development of national agriculture policy in the best way possible to reflect develop and developing countries such policies. Then set up of forums. Forums means institutions, maybe public, civic, private, market, and so on, with the participation of scientists to farmers. Forums. In that case, we need especially take the support of academics and research bodies, those involvement of such institutions, because we always talk about the department or Govijana Seva or a pure agriculture-based capacity development, decision-making in other countries, especially now I am in Canada for a small period of time. We know it is the universities, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, USDA, or in even any country, they are taking control by academics, administrators, and other researchers of deciding. So such forums are important. We wanted to make it happen like SLEA or Economics Forum or Sri Lanka University Forums, and already we had made such forums and come up with solution. Even at the last minute, day before leaving, we went there to hand over one final note, please do this one, if not we will fall into a very bad end. Right, see. Third one is setting up of institutions in terms of agriculture service. That was, I would say at this point, collapsed again. The people who are making decisions and running and taking decisions are not experts in agriculture many times. That's an unfortunate situation. For the medicals, it's medical. Dental, it is dental. Engineering, it is engineering. Architect, it is architecture. But for the economics but for the agronomy of agriculture, it is not they make decisions, but other people. So setting up of agriculture service back into the action was needed. Why? That's why we said agriculture and agriculture food security as the prime vision and mission of National Agriculture Policy to set up a very solid food system that is covering agricultural production systems, processing, distribution, and marketing systems, and then human health and well-being from other side. We are talking about nutrition, food justice, all these. Not only that, we should keep in mind, although this name, what is called organic, is used, we from the very beginning we told, don't at least use this name and destroy it. It might have been a green economy or an eco-friendly environment or something like that. When you tell organic, what is chemistry, what is non-chemistry? So likewise, thinking about air quality, soil quality, water, and everything, we should consider. Nobody can tell these are not important. So we should go into that one as the final goal, not the tomorrow we can see this much of air quality, this much of soil quality, and so on. So food system overview we have set up in our policy at the macro level, so that institutions come and work, scientists come and work, all people can rally around and they have a role to play. In that sense, food secure experience matters. I need another 3 minutes. So many people are thinking food secure from 3 points of view: accessibility, availability, and utilization. I believe from institutional point, it should be 5 points. We should first think about whether our food is adequate for our needs. Because of this decision, that was reversed. See, adequacy is not there. We were self-sufficient. We were going for a better goals. We were well ranked among the South Asian countries. That adequacy was now questioned. So we'll have to adopt and we'll have to reverse and go back to this condition. When things are adequate, we must know whether they are available when we need it. That is the thing. Oh, yala, oh, maha, oh, this way, that way. It should be available for the people that is used, that is needed. If the adequacy is not there, no availability will be coming from some other ends. So with that, we should have the economic and physical accessibility to that one. No point of talking about accessibility when other two are not there. Likewise, whether our food is acceptable to our traditions. Somebody can tell, okay, if food is not available, we can brought it easily from India, Bangladesh, somewhere. This red, this is that, this is that. So is that acceptable way of doing it? Is that our culture for us 2,000 years? Like Professor Manavi very correctly showed from 1948, is that we accept certain systems, traditions, think about livelihood of people, because it is not only rice availability or the fruits and vegetable availability. We may be going into other technologies, but we have a system, livelihood system attached with agriculture. Then the final most important thing, we have the agency problem. Who makes decisions? Who makes decisions for agriculture? Simply think about what is the power the medicos has, engineers has, architects has, all others has. But agriculture people, were they contacted? Were they what they have told? Were they listened? No, that's the agency problem. Institutions responsible for working on agriculture, not under one umbrella of policy. So our food system should be covered immediately by implementing National Agriculture Policy. I will come in my next 10 minutes, how we have done it. So don't think these are not the immediate actions. Immediately we can import, we can distribute like petrol, like today gas and everything, simple things can be done. But as agriculturists, as experts, researchers, administrators, academics, and institutions-wise, agency, we should work as an agency, regulatory, representative agency, under one umbrella. Well-written policy should be there. That will be who is going to control it, how is going to control it, at what time we are going to control it, and these are well-written institutions are named. So we have such a system developed by V12 work on that with the support of, I would say, 180 direct people, all people who are responsible and accountable for agriculture participated in that process. We can even implement that one next week because it is well written, everything, even the spellings and grammar mistakes corrected. With that, we can go fast and allocate their duties, allocate their targets, finance, and everything into different institutions and ask, please do it. Then we need to have a monitoring body. So Dilini, in the next 10 minutes, I would show what are those areas, how we are going to come up with short-term to mid-term to long-term, very scientific, systematic, practical actions that we can adopt. Thank you for giving time. First, I need maybe another 6 to 8 minutes later.
Thank you very much, sir, for bringing in an interesting aspect of the problem. And now I would like to give the floor to Dr. Devesh Roy. He has a lot of international experience on food supply chains. I'm sure he will be able to bring out the international experience at time of a crisis. So over to you, Dr. Devesh.
Sorry, so Dilini, can I just share the screen or?
Sure.
Yeah.
And Udit sir, can you take the slides down? Udit sir, can you unshare?
Unshare, yeah, that's what I'm doing. Wait. Unshare now.
Dr. Devesh, you are given co-host status, so you should be able
you can
to
take
share.
it, yeah. Only host. Dilini, I need to cut it. Okay, now it's done. Right.
Yeah, so I think now it's working.
Yes, it's working and we can see your slides. If you can, okay, great. Slideshow, right.
Yeah.
Yes,
so
over
no,
to you.
Yeah, no, thanks for this. Actually, what I'm going to be, talking is mainly from a very, very economist point of view, from a little bit of my outside view in sense, and with all the inside thing that I know about Sri Lanka is because I work with Dilini, Dr. Jivika, and Pradeepa. And we have, but it is more on the general perspective. And now what I'm going to be talking about is mostly on the recovery restoration side. So now as I said, that it will be very, an economist's, bird's eye view in some way, is basically that when you look at this recovery, I mean, essentially when I think about it, this thing is essentially what in economics is an economic growth challenge, right? Now, that is the way we have to think about coming out of crisis. What is there in so when you think about the economic growth challenge, so there is it comprises actually two challenges. One is what we can call as the structural change challenge, and then the other, which is what established like the fundamentals challenge. Now, the structural change challenge, which is a historical view. So the way we are going to look at it in terms of recovery, one is understanding it as a growth challenge, then it looking at what is the role of agriculture in that, and then how it moves into kind of thinking of in an agri-food system perspective, and then what are the food system innovations that would be needed in as part of this recovery process. So, as I said, the structure challenge, is a combination of two challenges: economic growth challenge. One is the structural change challenge, which is focused on moving resources from traditional low productivity activities into modern and more productive industries, and that will be the paradigm that would be applicable to what you're doing in terms of recovery process. And the other is the fundamental challenge. Say Sri Lanka is a very interesting case. Is about how best to develop these broad capabilities like human capital, infrastructure, and all. And in South Asia, Sri Lanka actually kind of really stands out in terms of what is the human capital levels that, compared to where I come from, like India or, now in Bangladesh is, why I say, we've always been saying that Sri Lanka could be now Bangladesh in this recovery process should be Bangladesh Redux. And we'll try to say why that is the case. So these two, they are inextricably linked, but they're conceptually different, as we'll see. And so when you look at, I say that this, you should look at as what is in economics is the growth challenge. Now, there are two traditions for explaining growth in economics. First comes from the development economics, and the other comes from what we see in the macroeconomic perspective. So initially, it started with a kind of a dual economy approach. I mean, pioneered by, first Nobel laureate on this, which is Arthur Lewis. So then there, and we have to see that in context-wise, how does it apply to Sri Lanka? Is that there you draw a sharp distinction between a traditional agriculture sector and a modern industrial or, highly productive sector and all. And the premise is that there are different logics at work when you look at this dualistic economy. So there, the accumulation, innovation, productivity growth, the two presentations that were there prior to this, and they talked about how important were the innovations and growth in productivity. And with all this fallout of the fertilizer policy that Sri Lanka did. So there is something the dualistic sector paradigm that is behind this, that this accumulation, innovation, productivity growth are all taking place in the so-called modern sector. And traditional sector is basically just playing a feeder role in that. And then that is the surplus labor provision that, the Lewis model that this is the picture. The point is this whole idea of agriculture playing a feeder role. And so that's why I'm saying that when you're going through this recovery process, and restoration, that how at the aggregate level, at the policy level, is it the really dualistic model thinking that, and also the other important part that you look at from the Lewis model perspective, that this dualistic sector there, where there was no trade in the model. And that's why we say when you move towards the food system paradigm and now see how the modern food system, because food systems are basically of three types, like the traditional, and then there's going to be modern. What modern food systems will comprise, both from input side, output side, would be a lot of focus on trade. And even during that time when there was this dualistic model setup, and that's what I'm saying, really insisting on that, because they were reinforcing paradigm even with open economy models, which actually, like Pravish and Singer, which actually tried to talk about that, if you would start exporting agriculture products, and trying to buy imported product manufacturers and all, the terms of trade would be such that, you will face a term of trade loss. And so basically going after agriculture as being the main source from a growth perspective was not there in this paradigm of a dualistic model. And that's what I fear, that when you look at from in the recovery process, what Sri Lanka would probably take, or which as the policy paradigms are showing, will be this inherent thinking of kind of a dualistic model. Now, the other thing that came with, which could be more kind of optimistic or more far-reaching from the point of view of agriculture, a contribution to growth process. And I say, I'm always trying to say that, what the thinking on from the economic growth process is, what is the way we are going to think about it from a recovery from this crisis. And that's another Nobel laureate, which was Schultz, he actually talked about the reason that there is a rural poverty is that there was a lack of suitable technology and the presence of human capital to utilize them. And then even with small farmers, if you provide them, and this could go resonate very much with what the fertilizer example that were there, that, how you became self-sufficient, you provided technology, you provided knowledge, and then you could actually get to a certain state. But, the moment you start inhibiting the access to suitable technology and presence of human capital, you to utilize them, you basically are going to be in a situation which would be not agriculture playing the role in growth as well as in recovery. So that's and then we just a little bit of a timeline that and which is pretty relevant here in way the history of economic thought that has been there on those dimensions, which is about the economic growth, the role of agriculture in the growth process. And then we'll now come to this idea of thinking of an agri-food system. That is the way that, you're trying to, but if you go a little bit into the history, and particularly I'm focusing on 1980s and 1990s, and that would really resonate with what is happening in Sri Lanka. So with the dualistic model, then there's a lot of other literature which tried to rationalize, even within the dualistic model, that what agriculture could play a role in the growth process. But this 80s and 90s were this period of global crisis. There was stabilization, the structural adjustment programs and all. And so the big question is, what are the implications for agriculture growth in that? Now, what happened in 1980s and 1990s was, if you look at the global landscape on that, agriculture policy was pretty much dictated by macroeconomic policy. Globally, I'm not talking about. And so the question here from the point of view of recovery, and why is this a concern? Because something got missed in, if you look at the whole literature and whole discourse during this period, what got missed was that how did this we'll come to the little bit of literature before I do the first segment, is this what happens to agriculture, poverty, rural development, that somehow in this phase of 80s and 90s, where there was this macroeconomic crisis, that got missed. And you can see that in the whole literature, that if you followed this Kruger, Schiff, and Waldes, and how there was disprotection of agriculture, what were the agriculture incentives in developing countries. You had overvalued exchange rates. You had different, schemes where it was industry favoring industry over agriculture. Overvalued exchange, it was a very, very big deal, which people didn't understand. There was a disprotection of agriculture, and the same in tariff policies. That and anti-export bias, and the thing that's always been missed, that we talk about food security, it always get missed that in order to export more, you need to import more. It's not only the classic Lerner symmetry theorem of an import tax is an export tax and so on. It's also the idea of globalized value chains, of more regional disintegration of production and so on. And that is what, and then there's the political economy. You can only export more if you are really open on the import side. So these are all these things where there was, and that would what I'm saying, that when you look at this growth recovery process, you might get back to this period of 1980s and 1990s, where the macroeconomic policy in trying to address macroeconomic crisis, but inherent was something about this dualistic economy, understanding that agriculture is just a feeder. It's not basically the leading light of growth, or is the pioneer of growth. And that's what, if you see now, these are all the transitions that have happened now in the thinking. Climate change has become as a focal issue. Now, nutrition and health have found a seat on the table. There's a food system approach that is looking at, now we're talking about sustainable food system. And one of the things that we want to emphasize, I said the last bit, that there has to be increased emphasis on metrics and measurement of in development. I mean, I'm not so much of a kind of advocate of RCTs and all that. You need to really run this. I mean, find the literature as, I mean, but still rigorous evaluation that, in trying to make it mainstream, and that would be a very, very important part of this when came in the fertilizer issue, where there was not evidence was not being used. And so in the recovery process, I mean, coming from the growth challenge perspective and development, this is going to be a really critical factor in going forward when we look at in the recovery process. And that would be, so Delaney, I'll stop here. I don't know if I hopefully have not exceeded time that much. And the other thing that I'll cover in the next segment.
Devesh, do you want to go over this slide? Do you want to talk about this slide, or you're good?
No, I can take them in the next segment, because this was just the kind of stage setting for what the way I've been thinking about is that, this is because these are now the things that are how we need to, apart from, we haven't gotten from a macroeconomic perspective, how we look at growth from the food system approaches, and then looking at what has happened in countries in terms of trade policy and what has been the responses and so on. So that we can talk in the next segment. I don't want to exceed time.
Thank you so much. Yes.
No, I know you are like really tight on time. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Devesh. And so with these three presentations talking about different aspects related to the current situation, now we can open the floor for discussion. If there are any questions, you can raise hand, and we can give you the opportunity. And until then, we will like to address some of the questions posted on the chat box. We have a question directed to Professor Marambe. That is by, is this Kotagama sir? By Hemasiri? Marambe sir, I forwarded you the question. Do you want to read it?
Yeah, thanks, Dilini. I can. Do I have to read that once again, or can I answer straight away?
Let me read it to the audience so that audience knows what the question is. So the question Dr. Hemasiri is asking is related to Professor Marambe's one of the slides where he compared the rate of fertilizer that Sri Lanka is using with the rest of the countries. And his point was that like the claim that we are overusing fertilizer is not supported, because there are other countries which are, especially in the region, which are using more than Sri Lanka. So Dr. Hemasiri's question is that, is it all right to benchmark or compare what other countries are using? Shouldn't we compare with the critical levels, looking at what is good for the environment, rather than comparing with other countries? So I think you can answer.
Thank you very much. Just one correction, Dilini. The data that I presented is basically to, provide evidence saying that what is being said by many people, that Sri Lanka is the country that use highest level of fertilizer from among countries in Asia, is not correct. That's the only thing that I want to let the audience know, because that was one of the reasons that many people went against use of fertilizers based on the discussion that we have had in the public. But the point that has been raised here by Professor Kotagama, I guess he's a member who is raising this question, is very valid. Let me tell you one thing. Sri Lanka has been struggling at several locations to try to see the loading factor. For example, take pesticide. We're trying to see whether the pesticide loading factor can be calculated. But when Professor Udit Jayasinghe was the secretary, finally, we came to a certain level of agreement that less do this, let's calculate the environment impact quotient, EIQ values, which have already been calculated and which takes into consideration not only the pest control aspects, but the human health aspects, environmental aspects. It's a kind of multivariate kind of analysis that comes into development of this environment impact quotient. And we actually did that for pesticides that have been used in Sri Lanka. And that was something to be implemented, but unfortunately that was not allowed because of the Gazette notification that have been issued. When the pesticides cannot be brought in, no point talking about EIQs. But now, since the situation we have seen some green light coming up, I think it is a high time that EIQ to be brought into action. And then we can decide, of course, the pest control ability of a pesticide is a must that must be considered. But apart from that, when you try to select pesticides, environment impact quotient, taking in other aspects into consideration, will have to be used. That is the only way out for the time being, Dilani. Still, there are problems, especially in pesticides. When a new molecule comes up, then EIQ values are not available. It has to be done through series of studies, of course, and we are using it and fitting it to Sri Lankan condition as well. So the idea is pretty good. We have taken initiatives, but this is not the high time or the right time to implement it because we are at a crisis situation right now. But in the short run, maybe from the next cultivating season, that is something that we have to look into very seriously. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for that detailed explanation. I think Dr. Hemasiri got the answer. And we have a question posted by one Miss Shenali to Dr. Devesh. And she says, Devesh, if you're hearing me, so for Sri Lanka, rice is a political product. So it receives no place in economics in terms of comparative advantage. How do you respond?
Yeah, no, thanks for that question. I mean, so rice is a political crop, not only in Sri Lanka, it's everywhere, right? What is political crop and how rice is, and so, coming from India, if you ever went to Punjab and you see that you have to take out, go 3 feet. I mean, you're not using so much of groundwater, so, but, in Punjab, you go 300 feet, 350 feet just to get water. So there's a lot of, so rice is, and if we go to Southeast Asia, rice is like the most political crop anywhere, right? Now the point is, this is, if you're coming from the comparative advantage point of view, comparative advantage is based on opportunity cost, right? So the point is that if you do rice, it is a very high opportunity cost that you're losing something that you're not doing other crop, because of which, you should not specialize in rice, right? Comparative advantage idea is about specialization, right? And with the wars and everything, and now when food security, so that would remain. But even within the, domain of, rice can be a political crop, and you can think about how you'll try to specialize in rice and produce. But at the same time, from a political economy perspective, you're doing things which are not the perfect thing for rice, right? I mean, that, you can be competitive by doing things on the input side. And then, what you do on fertilizers, what you do on and the export competition will also be really improve things for rice. So I'm saying that, you have to take the threshold that, there would be emphasis on trying to be self-sufficient. So you will not probably move out of rice, even if you don't have a comparative advantage, opportunity cost is high. But there's a lot of things that need to be done on the overall policy side, which will actually improve the outcomes. I mean, if you look at trade from a pure comparative advantage perspective, you have to think also from the point of view of the inputs and so on, and you look at the effective protection, and then you go from there. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Devesh. I think there's a related question. This from Dr. Mallavarachi. So he has not selected any speaker specifically, but I think it relates to more to you, Dr. Devesh. So his question goes like this. Do we believe rice-based production systems with subsidized inputs like water and fertilizer can be transitioned to a more productive system?
Yeah, so no, and that's that. The point is that we do all this economic stuff, so that we just try to do that, right? Now, Delaney and I, we have been talking about this for a long time, because my image of rice has been that you're such a water guzzler, you'd extract a lot of groundwater, and so Sri Lanka, at least in economics, everything is ordinal, right? It's compared to something. So it's not like cardinal. And so if you look at from that perspective, what you see in Sri Lanka, I mean, in a comparative sense, I mean, Delaney could correct me on that, at least in terms of water utilization and in terms of water use in rice cultivation, is comparatively good, right? Compared to what we see in India. Now, and then within that scale, if you want to get more efficient, I mean, there has to be technology, there has to be incentive that need to be generated. But in comparative sense, where you can compare with some other countries, in Sri Lanka's paddy cultivation, I think the utilization of inputs and the use of fertilizer, and that will also go back to Dr. Marambe's presentation, that it's not the most excessive use of fertilizer that we have in Sri Lanka, right? And if there is something that has happened on fertilizer that we have been talking about, which is, I can't pronounce it very well, though we have met Delaney and I, we have been trying to work on it, which is about when you did this policy of equalization of NP and K, right, prices. Now, as from an agroeconomic perspective, agroecology perspective, you always want different ratios of NPK, not 1-1-1, right? So the pricing should not be like that. So, if you come from the policy and you want to make it more efficient, there's definitely, there are many avenues that you can intervene from the policy side. I mean, we have been working on this, that how with different policy, and Sri Lanka has been experimenting massively with fertilizer policies, right? And those have a very significant implications on what is going to happen in terms of these optimal use of these inputs. So you are very right that we can really make it more efficient through policy. But if you want to talk in a comparative sense, on some dimensions, it's already comparatively efficient. But on an absolute scale, there's a lot of role for the policies. I mean, particularly in things like fertilizer, might be for so much for irrigation. But these are the issues that, will really, same thing for pesticides or, chemicals. I mean, there would be issues. My more important thing would be more on the output side. How do you make it, gear this segment for the markets? That, how do you export? How do you differentiate yourself? How do you move up the value chain? So there's a lot of things that need to be done on the policy side. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Devesh. And we have so many questions coming up. And there's one from, there's a concern that Dr. Gunatilaka is raising. But I think, sir, that we can take it up and your question will be addressed at the second session, where he wants solutions, not anymore talking about the problem. So we will get there, sir, hopefully in the next round. And we have a question from Mr. Rohan, I don't know, maybe a doctor, how a price formula for fertilizer is developed. Anybody in this forum?
Can I address that question?
Yeah.
Okay. A price formula has been developed by the National Fertilizer Secretariat, especially to pay the subsidies. When the subsidy issue was taken up, it was based on a price formula. The subsidy was given to the private sector who imported the fertilizers. So that's the way that's something that we have used. And right now, to the best of my knowledge, the price formula includes the CIF price. On top of that, all the cost of operations that take place within the country until it reaches the farmer, plus about 8% profit of the people who imported fertilizer will go into that. So there are many variables that come into effect. There is a price formula, but whether that is the price formula that is going to be put forward, as explained very recently by the government, I do not know. But as a subsidy payment or subsidy, that has been there. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, sir. There are some more questions, and in most of these questions, a common thing I see is that they are looking at strategies or solutions. I think as Sri Lankans, we are all on pins, like what we can do about this situation. I'm sure we can discuss answers to those questions in the next round. So I'm leaving it there. And with that, let's move on to the second round of presentations. I'm starting again with Professor Marube. And in this presentation, he will talk about the supply of seed and other agrochemicals in the supply chain and how they were affected and what can be done to restore them. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dilni. As I told at the very beginning, in the first session, I'll be focusing only on few crops, and I do understand that the solution that are proposed to one commodity will not be directly applicable to another. So with that understanding and due to the time limitation, we have to focus on certain items only. Dilni, when I look at the overall scenario, what has happened in the country, it always comes to my mind of the discovery program called Destroyed in Seconds. Why I use this is that because the title given to me was to propose something in the short run. And reviving Sri Lankan agriculture in the short run is going to be a Herculean task, very frankly. It requires meticulous planning and execution, effective coordination, as Professor Singh was talking about. It's a time-consuming process, and of course will be at a massive cost the way it goes, because we are talking about going back to the levels that we were or even beyond. That's the important point. So with that understanding, we all know there are several inputs several critical inputs in the case of a crop production system, but we only be focusing on seeds, plant nutrients, fertilizers, and crop protection or pesticides for the time being in this presentation. And I have to limit myself into few crops when it come to recommendations and so on. And we have to understand this aspect because I want to focus when it comes to seeds on rice and maize only for the time being because of the time limitation. And we know about more than 98% of the cultivated extent is cultivated to new high-yielding varieties, especially in the case of rice, and more than 90% of the cultivated extent in maize is through imported hybrids. And of course, mechanization has taken place to the level best in paddy and maize cultivation, but it does not mean that everything is applicable to all of the crops, as I told at the very beginning of my presentation in the session one. And mind you, the recommendations that I'm going to give have already been also similar type of recommendations have been submitted by the academics movement to safeguard agriculture, is called AMSA, and the Sri Lankan Institute of Agriculture, that's called as SLEA. All those entities have submitted their recommendations, and it's interestingly, even government of Sri Lanka look like coming up based on similar submissions, or maybe line of thinking is the same at this present context, have come up with some similar suggestions. So the first thing is about seed, and let me talk about paddy seeds, paddy production. Seed paddy is going to play a very crucial role because we have to meet the seed paddy requirement for Maha season. If at all, Yala season cultivation is going to get affected. That's something that we have to be very mindful, because the Yala season cultivation, a lot of people say the land is not being cultivated fully yet, but still the government departments, the private sector, the farming community, universities will have to bear this in mind, that even if the inputs are made available somehow or the other inputs, without quality seed paddy, Maha season is going to fail in a different context in that case. So this is something that we have to be very careful, because we all know annual seed paddy requirement is about 130,000 metric tons. For Yala, we required about 45,000. Now for Yala season, we have already got the seed paddy from the previous season's cultivation. Usually we know when farmers do produce, they keep about 25 to 30% 100% of their cultivation for their own consumption, as well as to be used in next cultivating season. So this season seed paddy supply, I think it's there for the time being, as I do understand. Although the market, the harvest that is coming to the market has reduced significantly, farmers have been using their own seeds. But the important point is, if the cultivated extents, as we know right now, is going to get reduced in the Yala season. For Maha season, where we need larger where we are going to have larger cultivated extents and more seed paddy requirement is there, we are going to fall in trouble. So while knowing this, we have to make sure seed paddy production should go ahead. And more importantly, once again, we are at a crisis situation. We know that priority for Maha season, next season, is usually 3.5-month varieties, because the season is pretty good and we always expect longer duration rice varieties to be cultivated. We have to play a game here. It's a critical issue. I mean, it's a kind of crisis management once again, even during this shorter time period that is remaining out of the Yala season. If at all the rice fields have not been converted into cultivation, that has to be done somehow or other, and also make sure farmers will produce seed paddy requirement for the next cultivating season. Of course, they will go ahead, but that encouragement will have to be there, because we have only about slightly over half of the season in terms of duration. So I think all Department of Agriculture, Mahaweli Authority of Sri Lanka, private sector, universities, farmers will have to get on board to make sure that whatever the seed paddy requirement for next cultivating season is produced, because this is a short-term thing. Short-term in the sense, we have to embark it on this season to make sure the next season will be put into production. And then comes maize production. Now, unlike in seed paddy, where 100% requirement of seed paddy is met from local production, in the case of maize production, more than 95% of the cultivated extent, more than 90% of the cultivated extent is through imported hybrid maize. So the requirements are there. The problem is the cost. And what we learned right now is even the limited quantity of hybrid seeds that have been imported to Sri Lanka are not being sold to the farmers. Farmers do not want to procure because of the issue with respect to fertilizers and other agricultural inputs. So they do not want to get into cultivation. But fortunately, in Yala season, not good to say fortunately, but still it's okay, because we cultivate very low extent of maize. And of course, Maha season is again the most crucial point. Unless there is a support, there's support coming from the state and private sector with external support, it will be difficult to bring back the farming community into maize production, because maize seed production or maize production is pretty crucial for animal feed. And as you know, in the chicken feed the prices have been increasing day by day because of heavy or high feed cost and so on. And of course, people are moving away from even chicken farming in most of the cases. I do understand the day-old chicks, which were sold sometimes at about 170 rupees, now cannot be even sold at 20 rupees. So that's a claim that comes from the poultry sector because of the damage or the disruption that has been done to the input supply. So this is something that we have to be cognizant of. We have to work together in order to achieve this. So certain quite good planning system is required to make sure the hybrid seed is provided. Sri Lanka has also produced 5 maize hybrid varieties, though the yields are relatively low compared to the imported hybrids. The Department of Agriculture will definitely have to chip in and get at least whatever the available seed lots to be cultivated by farmers. So this is one of the ways that we can move ahead. I'm not talking about Yala, I'm talking about Maha season, because in order to look at it in the short run, we have to plan right now. In order to look at even in the next Maha season, we have to work it out today onwards in order to make sure Maha season will work, because whatever the damage done for the Yala season, I think in my own opinion has already been done. Of course, there are certain recoveries that can be made, especially by getting them some quantities of fertilizer. In addition to the organic fertilizers, the government has already agreed to be distributed among farmers free of charge. The best way out is integrated plant nutrient systems. The Department of Agriculture has been preaching this for quite a long period of time. This has to move ahead. It's not only the synthetic fertilizers that we have to use, but the organic fertilizers as well. So in a crisis situation like that, most of the people have supported that try to get nitrogen fertilizers somehow or other from anywhere to make sure that the Yala season will not show a total failure, but at least to bring the Yala season production to a certain level, especially in terms of paddy production, of course, maize, and including tea as well. So there are, at least 50% of the nitrogen recommendation is something the scientists have calculated, thought of, because organic fertilizer although it's based on a calculation done considering the nutrient content in the inorganic fertilizer without considering the release of nutrients from the organic fertilizer to meet the requirement of the different growth stages of a crop, still at a crisis situation, we have to go ahead like that. And I think I'm not a supporter of subsidies, but then still in a crisis situation, we have to have well-directed price support for the most needed to make sure. And we all know 65,000 metric tons of urea fertilizer is to be imported from India through the Indian credit line. And this is highly insufficient to whatever the crop that we have. But of course, in terms of prioritization, this is the time that we have to prioritize, not to ignore everything, but in terms of getting maximum output or maximum outcome out of this limited amount of urea that we are importing or getting down from India. Paddy can be as a food crop, maize as a feed crop, and a tea as an export crop. I think whatever the remaining, if it is remaining, can be distributed among other crops. And organic fertilizer use should be encouraged, as I told you, in conjunction with the fertilizer. This is something that we saw a silver line in the whole problematic scenario that we saw. In the previous cases, we have always been promoting this conjunctive use, but many people ignored. But at least time has come up. People at least try to understand the use of organic matter is a requirement. Remember what I showed in the first session. The best results have been released when in paddy, when the synthetic fertilizers have been used with organic fertilizers. And now the important part is that we are hearing a lot of recommendations coming from different parties asking people to use organic fertilizers, but without falling into trouble. My advice is that Government Department of Agriculture and the Ministry of Agriculture should advocate that the farmers to fit into the recommendations that have been given by the Department of Agriculture for food crops and other commodity research institute for others. Unless we are going to end up with another failure, even if we try to provide the fertilizers at nominal prices, even at nominal prices or at limited quantities. So the best short-term action is to plan right now for Maha, even using fertilizer, as I told you, in the case of seed, paddy, and other seed requirements. Pesticides, there's a slide to come. Of course, integrated pest management is something that we have to move. Once again, following recommendation is important. And of course, one of the biggest problems that we have in the market right now is the smuggled products that have come into Sri Lanka, which includes pesticides that we have banned long time ago. So this is something that has happened in this country. So we have to be very cognizant of this and advocate and make sure these are all smuggled products. And we have to make sure that these products are removed from the market. Not an easy task to be done because farmers have already acquired the products from many retail outlets. So the education awareness has to come up at a very dramatic level, I must tell you, to make sure farmers go by whatever they're available, but based on the recommendations of the Department of Agriculture. An interesting circular was issued by the Essential Service Commissioner on 15 May 2022, looking at pesticides as well as hybrid seed imports. We all know Sri Lanka in a foreign currency crisis. Even if we are to bring those things into the country, we need certain amount of foreign exchange reserves or support coming from other entities by repurposing the loans that have been given to Sri Lanka. So there are several attempts that have been made, but to support this, the Essential Service Commissioner has informed the central bank governor that the country is now considering import of pesticides and hybrid seeds as an essential service. So it's an interesting scenario that has developed. This has come up because of the urgent requirement in the country, and that will be done only for the yellow season, as I see, based on the document that have been submitted. So these are some actions that have been taken. I don't think anyone recommended, even the two organizations that I mentioned earlier, AMSA or SLEA, did not go through such a recommendation, but government has understood the need. And we should not forget in doing all these things. I saw there's a question coming up earlier also. We do understand India banned wheat exports in the recent past. And in Russia, which we are a location where you can purchase urea at cheapest prices in the world market, have already decided to go for a temporary halt in terms of export. All these countries are doing it to make sure their own food security is safeguarded. And China also closed the door after opening up for a while during this year for urea and other fertilizer exports. All these things have to be planned in the short run by considering all these things. So my suggestion for the short run and long run is to make sure the farmers are taken on board in adopting Sri Lanka GAP or Sri Lanka Good Agricultural Practices. The certification is done by the Department of Agriculture and is free of charge, unlike the third-party certifications coming up for many other certification programs. The standards are set, the implementation will have to take place. Once again, as a crisis management, I don't think this is going to be a good idea for this Yala, but I think we can do a good planning and start embarking on this starting from next Maha. This is one of the ways to curtail excessive use, if there's any, of pesticides and fertilizer, and also to make sure people will go by the recommendations, ensuring finally a safe product, nutritious product will also land with the consumer on the lunch and dinner tables. So with all that, and this is my last slide, and I want to end up by telling this. We have always been talking about short-term policies and everything without considering certain gazette notifications that have been issued that have blocked the proactive movements of the government departments which have been mandated to develop agriculture in this country. There have been 3 task forces that have been appointed through gazette notifications, and there's no issue in appointing task forces, but the biggest problem is the last 2 statements in these task forces. I'm going to present it to you. It's a bit crowded slide, but please do get this point very clearly. These last bullet points in this slide very categorically says what the gazette notifications that have been issued establishing the task forces have said. It has actually broken. It has actually created a situation where the backbone of the state departments have been broken completely. So one of the best ways to bring them back on board and make sure they become responsible, and now, of course, they are committed to their efforts. The most important part is to remove these 3 gazette notifications, repeal these 3 gazette notifications, because in most of the things, take the last Green Agriculture Task Force that have been established. Out of the 14 members of the task force, 8 are from private sector who are producing organic fertilizer, and they are the ones who have provided their own products to be tested by the Department of Agriculture, for example. And they are the ones, according to the regulations given by the gazette notification, it says the members can direct, here I means the president, and I mean the president, direct all public officers and other persons to comply with all such instructions given by them. And not only that, it also goes further and says that the president himself from the task force hereby require and direct the said task force to report to him if there are any case that the government departments delay, or whoever the authorities that get advices from the task forces delay their actions. So this is a very dangerous scenario when you look at the country's agricultural development. I think even to consider the short, medium, and long-term efforts, this is something that go out. So that make the Department of Agriculture, Commodity Research Institute, other development agencies related to government and other places, to make them responsible in what they do and also ensure that their work will get facilitated. Thank you very much, Dilini, for the time allowed. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much, sir. You can enjoy a glass of water now. Okay, now let me invite Professor Udit Jaisinghe to make his presentation on the role of agricultural institutes to restore the agricultural supply chains in the country. Over to you, Udit sir. Marambe sir, you may take down the slides.
I think it is done, Dilini.
Yes. Udit sir, you can make it slideshow and start your presentation.
Yeah. Point. Sure. Why it is not okay, right? Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I think you have seen Professor Marambe has very clearly explained short-term actions that we have taken and at least tried to be in place in terms of setting the agriculture back into the scenario. I firmly believe this thing. So whatever it is, how urgent it is, if it is science, if it is to be addressed by science, it should be scientific. And for that science to run, there should be operation management system, definitely. Otherwise, all people will come their own tools and instruments and say, this is the best, this is the best. So if all agreed did not there, at least vast majority agreed or majority agreed system must be there. That should be very practical. So that is in mind. We have come up with this scenario of national agriculture policy, I should tell, because this is an umbrella view. We are focusing from the top, then we give goals, divisions, missions, institutions, policy actions to each and every institute, agriculture institute that is responsible for setting national food security in terms of food and feed. So in that process, we come up with 7 key issues. You can see, I don't want to tell. Rather than working purely on agronomic practices, fertilizer or pesticide, that in this thing, that is one aspect of it. It is higher prioritized in terms of production and productivity. At the same time, these 7 key issues to be addressed from very short time to medium to long term, divided on a time horizon. So we have done it. So we are not telling something to be done. They are well written by groups of people, experts, and tested with political system, administrative system, media, even with farmers, and all 7 social systems we set and discuss. The market competitiveness, climate change, all issues were addressed. How it has come to address those 7 issues? We need to have a very practical solution to be implemented, say, from next week. So we have divided our work, also our instruments or policy options into 10 thematic areas. Many of you might have already known these, but they have not come up with, because this has gone, as I told, even up to the HE's level, parliamentary level, not come up with for no reason. But anyway, thematic areas are these 10. Crop production and productivity, input management, advanced technologies, food safety and quality management, eco-friendly operations, entrepreneurship and markets, producer empowerment, climate resilience and other risk management, knowledge management, agriculture extension, and finally governance and operations management. So we divided all policies into these 10 different areas because agriculture institutions are very different. Some are academic, some are research-based, some are media-based, some are political, some are working on technology, some are working from market point of view. Likewise, so each and every person must have work to do because they are mandated. But if they are not monitored and evaluated by a central body with the power, they will be again doing things up and down here and there, what they know, rather than what is needed. So these thematic areas were then, what we have done was classified under 15 different policy options, policy scenarios, and each is supplied with strategic actions, policy actions. Not only that, for each action, we have identified which institution is responsible, accountable, checked for and informed. So these 4 also there. So what I am telling is, if we are not going by such a systematic way, again, man with the power, man with more political power will be coming and tell, okay, this should be green, this will be eco-friendly, this will be organic, this will be inorganic, this will be synthetic, and very different names. Rather, those policy actions, they are, of course, if I'm not wrong, Professor Marbe and all people were there. There were 185 policy actions allocated in different institutions, well documented. Then we can take that one from central point of view, divided, ask them to implement, allocation of finance, allocation of scope, monitoring, and teaming up, everything will be under one program. Where it is failed, where it is passed, can be easily monitored at least. We know why it is failed, why it is happened so. That means most important thing is the political or a one person may not be able to take a decision that must be like that. It is my duty like that. So, you know, the good examples I'm experiencing even now and following to some extent, it is a return on investment. The policy is return on investment even in Canada. Their first investment is on livestock and poultry industry because they know when you invest $1, the highest return in terms of financial return, economic returns, social returns is highest in livestock sector. Second, it is research. If you invested $1 on research system, it is $1.69 are generating within 3 years. So they always go with from better to better to better. So right now, as Professor Marme very correctly told, our system was there somewhere. We wanted to go up, but ultimately this Kapota hit the plane and landed not on the airport, now in an adjacent paddy field somewhere. We will have to bring it back to at least airport now. So best thing is to set up not a one institution like Department of Agriculture or a forum of university academics only, or only parliamentary members likewise. Rather, if you can come up with a sort of high-powered committee who is working on these proposals and monitoring it, these actions, we can easily classify what are to be implemented today. So we have very clearly come up with, as Professor Marme told, it is $1.32 billion expensive on fertilizer, but we come up with $7 billion worth action to be implemented from this YALA because last Maha was in trouble. But it was not come up in that way, 7 billion plan. So even farmers ask, give us 50%, we will buy 50%. Now see what has happened. So rather than talking about those, I would say that in the short term, to achieve those what Professor Marbe has clearly shown in terms of crop production, productivity, and input management point of view, all we have in the university system or in agriculture research system or in administrative system, media, farmers, now we have something known, well written, that can be monitored. It can be results based, at least which can be revised. So please, as institutions like Sri Lanka Economic Association, Agricultural Economic Association, Agriculture People's Association, and university economists or somebody's, and all people should ask, okay, please implement national agriculture policy so that each and every institution responsible, accountable for agriculture, they know what to do. If he or she is asked to do something other, he can vehemently reject. No, if otherwise, it is very correctly told somebody in the notes section, no point of doing these things if you can't control or prevent politicians coming and making decisions. It is very difficult to do that one. You know, in practically starting from US to Ethiopia, now Ethiopia is replaced by Sri Lanka, politicians are coming and making decisions. We cannot avoid. But at least if we can control them, right? Control them with a program and pressurize. Now we come up to that level. After all this happened, when things are failed to a 95%, so it is now easy to build it up because you're doing something, even small is a big thing now. So we'll gather and work on an agenda like this. Each and every institution has planned to do, work to do. That is my objective of telling this one. A well thought out strategic action plans are there. They are well categorized into medium to long term, and respective institutions are well understood. These are just to be released with a one signal. It can be easily implemented. We should be a pressure group, especially. we should together ask, please go ahead if you want, if otherwise we will be in trouble. Thank you so much for giving the opportunity. Open for any question. If we know the answer, we can share. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Udit sir. And finally, I would like to move to Dr. Devesh Roy's presentation. Over to you, Dr. Devesh, and Professor Udit, you can take down the slides.
Yeah. Right.
Okay. Thank you, Denise. This is, as we just in the first segment that we had...
Devesh, sorry to interrupt. Make it slideshow.
Oh, yeah. Is it now okay?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So, in the first segment that, and because I know there was a lot of concern in terms of, what is the way forward, what needs to be done. Now, where we stopped in the first segment was to basically make the point that drawing from all the macroeconomic crisis that has happened in, say, Latin America, in Southeast Asia, and also in South Asia, right? Even you take the 1991 crisis in India, when you think about the recovery process, it's always, it's, still at the back end is something like the dualistic model that, it's the industry, it's the manufacturing, it's the services sector. That is going to be the main torchbearer or the main puller, main sector pulling you out of this any crisis. So that's why it's important that to in the discourse in terms of policy making. I mean, one example that I was thinking particularly from Sri Lanka, like globally, what you see is unprecedented level of inflation. That US, for instance, has one of the highest inflations in 3-4 decades, right? And this is the point at which that's really the point at which you really target the market, and this is like the opportune moment to really make significant gains. And that going back to the earlier presentation, and you have seen declining production of tea in Sri Lanka, but this is also the point to just stop thinking about only from the point of view of import substitution or food security. This is really the moment at which you have to get more extra aggressive in trying to target external markets. So even if you come from real theorizing on this, right, when you try to come out of the crisis, so this non-agriculture obsession in some way in terms of growth, in terms of recovery, you can just go to the, as you said, traditional literature and see what agriculture does, and then build it into your recovery plans. I mean, it provides you labor if you want to do it from in industry side. It can also provide you capital if you, and say thirdly, we're talking about what is happening at unprecedented levels in the importing countries, where Sri Lanka can get a little more aggressive, is about providing foreign exchange. I mean, that is always thought about, it might be textiles and apparel that might be thought of that, but there is a lot of relative food price increase in the world where there is a big opportunity for that. And this definitely is going to provide market for food is definitely one of the factors, and then it would provide market for industrial goods. So, and then we have to see that, go from the food system perspective, what needs to be done, that, these are the things that what has changed essentially. So if you look at and going forward that so there is going to be a lot of trade of processed and ultra processed food that is there. The diets consist of a large share of animal source food. And so these are the things that in way they are in part of the food system transformation. And there's a lot of premium on product differentiation, that if you did this kind of a haphazard way of this organic experiment, but even if you're not going toward this extreme experiment of organic, there's a lot of premium on fair trade. There's a lot of premium of health in post-COVID world. And that's the thing that but there was some discussion about a Sri Lanka gap. I think I was not conscious about, because we have worked on food safety in Sri Lanka, that how mainstreamed is the Sri Lanka gap and how much of the international recognition it is there. I mean, to not along the lines of global gap and all, but right now, if you look at the agriculture markets globally, and you can see the product differentiation that is coming from exports from Vietnam, even from Bangladesh, during this post-COVID world, they have actually focused a lot on non-price attributes. And that is something which, is part of the food system that we need to really think about in Sri Lanka. There is now, so these are, if you look at the food system transformation, then there are this point that what we need is, I'm trying sustainable intensification. And we have our colleagues who are speaking from the Department of Agriculture. Sustainable intensification is more about what inputs you are using and in production, right? Sustainable intensification, I meant it more from an economic point of view, that how much of fertilizer you can apply, how much of fertilizer would be accessible given all the geopolitical reality. So there has to be a plan that has been to be formed for given the 2 seasons that are coming up, is that to look at what would be like, and you will have to not look at sustainable intensification in the agroecological sense, but more from the economic sense. I mean, there's the things about, I was looking at figures on food waste and the resources that are used to produce food and those environmental impacts. And those things are always there. But the key for, if you look at from all the recovery episodes that are there, I mean, I don't have time to go into, I accumulated all this in different crises, including the 2008 food price crisis and the COVID responses. So we always worry so much about production, but the biggest part of the food economy, and which has grown globally, are basically the food enterprises. It is processing, food services, restaurants, institutions, hotels. So this is retail. These are the segments which are the biggest component of the food economy. And if I could have time to just go through all those cases, and there was the generalized feature that, everywhere the recovery that has taken place is in this segment, which is not about agriculture production that has really brought in this. It's basically the component of food economy, which is about connecting producers with businesses, with the other parts of the food economy, the food enterprises, that has really got the countries out of crisis. So what you can do in terms of policies to allow this internal market, domestic markets as well as external markets, that is something when bring in product differentiation. And product differentiation is not only in terms of food quality, safety, grading, certification, it's also in terms of delivery mechanisms. And that is what, is the learning from the post-COVID period. So, and this all, as I said in the first segment, that Sri Lanka would have to invest in building capacities for integrating data, analytics, and assessments. That is what I really don't find that, this requires, it's a very intensive process. It's a very research-oriented process to bring this thing. It requires marketing research. I mean, it requires consumer research. It's like a lot of things, not only in the domestic market. I was just scanning that so much of, there's a demand for Sri Lankan tea. And then I was just looking at this David's tea, which is an outlet in the US. And they said that their supply of Sri Lankan tea is pretty choked. They would really benefit if they are able to get it now. But that part of, the aggressive strategy does not target these pockets where you can just do this. So here is the food system transformation. If you want to summarize this, I mean, this is a paper by Clean in 2019, which I thought was very relevant for, going down. They really categorized this was, they said that, what you require in food system transformation, which is also in relation to what was there in recovery, or restoration, as it is being called somewhere. So what would require is alignment with the overall purposes of recovery, then and inclusiveness, because this crisis also has a lot of social costs, so then we require a lot of inclusiveness. And you can see that behind all this, you require a lot of data and evidence in order to do this. How you redesign the food system here, and there would be some food system innovation and then they have to be. You don't have unlimited resources. So we have to do with innovation with a purpose, that we have to really zero down on some of those. We have to get the incentives right. That is the most important thing that we learn from economics, right? So all the policies that we pay, they have always unintended consequences, and basically in terms of getting the incentives wrong. So how do we get the incentives right? And this is where, if you do subsidy, which would always be really much proposed, going forward. But the idea is first to do research and see what kind of incentives it will engender. And a platform for an action-based research, that's all we have always been insisting. I don't have the time to go through all that. But the last bit that when you're looking at in today's time, when you're looking in the time of globalized value chains, and what would it require for domestic value chain transformation in times of recovery and restoration, as you want to say. So that is, you have to see that where be the domestic chain, and particularly in the post-pandemic period. And this is the evidence that I'm saying that, you look at from all different countries, that growth or recovery or restoration has been strongest in subsectors where product standards are the most important. So it's fruits, vegetables, seafood, fish, meat, dairy products. And if you just want to summarize and just look at what is the evidence and where that has been the restoration or recovery has taken place, it is precisely in those sectors where product standards or non-price attributes in general. This could be product differentiation based on delivery mechanisms. This could be product differentiation based on quality. But in all those things, those are the segments which have actually, you'll go to focus on paddy, you're going to focus on cereals. But basically, if you're thinking about what's going to be, the driver and going away from the dualistic economy setup, and this being the forebearer of change and recovery, these are the segment that you really need to target. So this is something which, if you look at this phenomenal paper that Barrett and Paul did, and they showed that most of the time we look at production, we look at consumption, but the whole activity, and he has written all these papers related to COVID also, and shown examples from Africa, Southeast Asia, that the real recovery actually took place through the midstream. The midstream is basically what, is the processing, retail, all those segments are the wholesale. And there you have to look at three revolutions that I talk about, which first one I really don't subscribe to. They talk it like supermarket revolution, and I don't think those numbers are as palatable to me as they show it for like 18% share of supermarkets in Pakistan. You talk to any Pakistani, they would not really find it. They give like 12% share in India, which is also not true. But that is happening to a certain extent, right? But the big thing, which I think would be a little more complex with all the disruption that there on tourism and other sectors, but domestically also you'll have to think about the food service sector. You have to invest in that. If you have to provide credit lines, if you have to do emergency credit, this is the segment that you need to do in going forward, which is the food service sector. I mean, basically food enterprises in general, food manufacturing, food service, and so on. So there's a quiet revolution that is there in value chain intermediation. And that is the segment that we need to target in recovery. And you can, if anybody is interested, we can see a look at all the evidence from different crises and where the agri-food sector has played a role in terms of bringing in. You have to put in resources, human resource, intellectual resource. You have to put in the capital, our policy resource as well. I mean, that's the very important part in order to get this thing from there. And that's why I'm saying the agriculture value chain transformation, we need to do for Sri Lanka, do a rigorous evaluation, see where the input's needed. But that's where, and that you should target like the export market as well as the domestic market. And this actually has the biggest, it can really biggest puller of all these things. So these are the last slide that I just want to, this was like, but when for all the neglect of agriculture, when it got back into the development agenda, when the World Development Report targeted specifically agriculture. And I think there were three key questions that they raised, and that's the question that we're going to ask for recovery as well. So first is that what can agriculture do for recovery? First, get research, get evidence for Sri Lanka. I mean, there's a lot that agriculture can do for recovery. And then my fear is compared to or in line with all the earlier macroeconomic crisis, agriculture will go to the sideline. Agri-food sector will go to the sideline. So get it mainstreamed. And, Professor Udit was talking about all this thing in the policy and how to mainstream this. That is, you should take it as, the question is what to do next. You just try to get evidence, make a case for it. This is really, really important because it will really fall through the cracks otherwise. There would be underinvestment, there will be even misinvestment in agriculture, and that's some of it which we saw in the early presentations. Second question is that what are the effective instruments in using agriculture for recovery? Some of it we talked about, that you have to focus a lot on midstream, you have to focus a lot on food enterprises, and you have to really find these markets which are really giving you new opportunities in the post-COVID period, in the high inflation world that we are in. So those are the things that, we really need to think about what are the effective instruments. Now, at a more, because it's also, even though you are a much higher income country than India, and the second highest income country in South Asia, you still have this, development challenge that will be there, particularly after crisis, because there would be new development challenges will come. So as part of this, when you look at agriculture, and we have to think about a strategy, and, Dilini, Dr. Jivika, Pradeepa, and I, we were working on what happened in terms of policy responses post-COVID. And because of the macroeconomic situation, what you really see is that, there is not very little action that happened on the credit front. So, and that's why you will not be really increasing the assets of these poor households. So you have to really, next big target would be in recovery, one of the big, most important instrument becomes credit and insurance, right? So the credit part is something that, from whatever funds are coming in, that, for agriculture, there should be a strong push, not only for agriculture, but for the food economy, including food enterprises. There we are doing food services, retail, wholesale. There has to be a real targeted, targeted I'm saying because it can also lead to a lot of negative selection. That you do research, you try to identify the pockets, and then this must be the top priorities to actually increase the credit flow if there has to be a recovery of the sector. So, this is what I think I will stop here, but there are this thing that we can see that, during all different crises, how the changing value chains have been utilized, and how digital technologies have been utilized in the recovery process, how new modalities for extension, new financial and flexible financial instruments have been used in agriculture. That can extend credit to this, but I want to extend it to this kind of the larger food economy, because they would be what will bring the surest and fastest recovery. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Devesh. I think you propose so many strategies that as Sri Lanka um, can undertake in order to take us to the recovery trajectory. Okay, with that, we have concluded all the presentations. Now the forum is again open for Q&A. There were several questions posted on the chat box, and it was encouraging to see that already a dialogue has established between the speakers and the participants, and most of their queries are being addressed on the chat box. Yeah, so if I pick one or two questions for the benefit of a larger audience, there is one of the questions that was posted was, now some of our speakers was looking at agriculture as a sector on its own, whereas you were looking at, so I guess in some way we should try to bridge this gap, right? Any recommendations for us?
Yeah, sorry, am I muted? No, I think that is precisely the point, actually, that you look at, and including in Sri Lanka, right? If you look at just look at growth rates in the food economy. What is the growth rate of agriculture, on the production side, on the primary production side? It's basically the highest growth is coming from the rest of the segment, right? Which is the other parts of the value chain, which is the different components of the food economy. That is the one which is actually, if you look at the agri-food sector, they are driving the growth. So the question is that, and this is where, we're referring to evidence from all the crises, that in the agri-food economy, where the recovery has taken place is where they have linked these two sectors. They have invested in augmenting these linkages, then they are scaling up these linkages. They are the ones, so that requires a lot of, first of all, back-end systems, which is, require grading. So why doesn't really these linkages scale up to the level that they should, either domestically or internationally? Is because you don't have the right back-end system. We always think about that only when you are kind of exporting, that you need all this global gap certification or the other certification, you need grading and so on. And not so much is thought about in the domestic markets. But these are the preconditions that are required for these markets to scale up. I mean, you want to pay a little bit more only when you are assured of food safety, right? And food quality. And then there's product differentiation, that, there's a different packaging. There is to get product differentiation is the one most important component of forming these linkages and the scaling up. And this is not only for domestic market, but for the other markets. And then there are the supply side things, which, I don't know how it is in Sri Lanka in terms of, the priority sector lending and all, which only goes to, in India, goes to agriculture in primary production. They really do not cover food enterprises. And they really struggle to get credit. And Delaney, from our work post-COVID in Sri Lanka, we saw very little credit support, right, for the enterprise sector. And so these are the things that, you really need to think of them as a agri-food sector, have the policies that will really treat them as agriculture. And that is how your lending policies, your insurance policies, all those things should work out. And you need those back-end investments for grading, certification, guarantees for these markets to scale up. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Devesh. You have a message from Mamta asking you to take down the slide presentation.
Sorry.
Yeah. So are there any more questions for the speakers? Most of the questions, as I noticed, were answered in the chat box. Yeah, another question, maybe I can direct this to all three speakers. This question I saw repeatedly coming up from several participants. That is, at the moment, we have a forex shortage. And in a crisis management, we should be prioritizing. We have limited supply of forex, how to prioritize among so many demanding sectors. So how do we go about this? If I start with you, Devesh, and I would like to get the view of other speakers as well.
Yeah, so thanks, Dini. I'm actually, for answering this question, probably, I would need someone from, from really macroeconomics, this thing to, I can just, from a very, so the forex thing is that, you have a foreign exchange shortage that definitely we know, right? And this was part of the reason that I was saying that, one thing is, some of the things are beyond the control of Sri Lanka. This pandemic crisis happened, the tourism sector was affected, those exports were affected. Then, but this traditional export that, from where you can really have the foreign exchange, I think there is a high potential right now, given at least from what is happening in terms of global inflation, that, you actively pursue some targeted exports, and that, that would really address this foreign exchange issue to a certain degree. I mean, things about debt service payments and all, as I said, there will be a lot of macroeconomic issues of what is being negotiated with IMF and all. That would itself would have certain realignments, and that could work towards doing that. But we can only think about from the agri-food sector that what we are thinking from the export side and from the import side. I'm not anyway recommending that, you're going to cut down on your imports of fertilizers or of input in order to save foreign exchange. My perspective would be to you import and, and then you probably become more productive in export. And you do try to specialize based on comparative advantage, do a lot of market exploration. There's a huge potential that is coming up because of global inflation. And that is something on which, you have to really get more aggressive. And that could even mean in the post-pandemic world of being more aggressive about tourism, because Sri Lanka, at the end of the day, is a beautiful country. And, there's a lot of demand for tourism to Sri Lanka. And so if you come and see what is happening in Western world, that how all these Caribbean nations and, the Dominican Republic and all, how aggressively they are promoting tourism here in the post-pandemic world. And I really did not see, at least in US, maybe in Europe and somewhere else, Sri Lanka is doing that. But that could be a big source of foreign exchange for such a attractive tourism destination like Sri Lanka. So this is just my an observation as a kind of a real amateur macroeconomist. But yeah, that's what I mean. For agri-food sector, I think still there is a lot of unexploited potential of exports in this time of high global inflation.